you corrected me when we stopped recording, and I said, change the country, but you say change the world as a whole, 9/11.
It sure did. We had known terrorism and attacks at different levels, domestic terrorism with the Oklahoma City bombing, but it changed the world as a whole. Everything is different, the way we fly, the way we think, how we look at each other. It changed the way that we perceive anyone that's different from us. And for quite a long time, people have perceived somebody different as a threat. And what we need to return to thinking is that just because you're different than me doesn't mean that you're a danger. It just means that you might worship different, that you might eat different, that you might live different. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, when we get to know our neighbors, sometimes they're just like us. They love their children the same way. They have the same aspirations. They look at history the same way. They don't want things to repeat.
Can you walk us through that day? How it started for you?
Sure. But giving you some background, 9/11 wasn't my first brush with terrorism. May 30th, 1972, my parents were scheduled to be at a pilgrimage arriving in Tel Aviv in Israel. And 3 Japanese mercenaries were hired by Palestinians to perpetrate an attack at the airport on unsuspecting tourists just arriving in Tel Aviv. And it's called the Lod Airport Massacre. And we lost about 4 members of my family. Luckily, my mother freaked out before boarding the plane and decided she wasn't going on this pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And my parents never boarded, so they are alive. But my father's cousins perished. One was a pastor of a church, and a lot of the people who were doing a trip to the Holy Land. So I have some exposure to traumatic grief before then, even though my parents tried to shield us. Mm-hmm. But on 9/11, I had taken the week off to take my little girl to kindergarten. My daughter Aurelia, that attended BBC and was in ASB and was in Model UN and who loved this college. So it was her first week of kindergarten. So I took time off so we could do the whole mommy takes you to school, do the pictures. And it's funny, her first day at BBC, I insisted she duplicate that picture. And those are really fun memories for us. So on 9/11, my pager went off. It was a communication device we carried back then.
Yes, for all you young people, it was a little box that you put on your belt loop that would beep at you.
and messages would come across like in text form. And it would give you either the name of somebody, maybe a phone number, and then you would call that person and communicate with them. So my cell phone went off and my beeper went off, and basically it was alerting me that there was a mass casualty incident in Manhattan and that all uniform services were to respond to the scene. And my neighbor kept calling me, so finally, like on the 3rd phone call, I answered, and she was hysterical. And she said, an airplane hit the Empire State Building. And I'm thinking, that's a big deal. And I ran home to get into uniform so I could respond. When I got home, I turned on my TV, and media coverage had already started. And it wasn't the Empire State Building. It was the Twin Towers. And I had grown up watching them build the Twin Towers.
In that moment, were you like, oh, this was a really bad accident, I gotta get ready, or were you like, this is something else? Because I was younger, I was in high school, and I just thought it was an accident until maybe an hour into it, we started to understand someone was attacking our country. We didn't really know at first.
those of us in service knew automatically that if something struck the World Trade Center or any of the significant high buildings in New York City, that it was deliberate. Because if you did any training, you would understand that those were always considered major targets, and they were big and obvious. I mean, you could see them for 50 miles in any direction from the sky if you had a clear day. And it was just clearly visible that if you hit those towers, clearly in your mind, you immediately understood that it was not an accident.
We're going to take another quick break, and then when we come back, we'll talk a little more about what happened on that day. We're here with Reggie Cervantes. Don't go away.